So Russia has two symbolic moments this week, you know, 26 and a half months after it invaded Ukraine. Uh, on Thursday will be Victory Day when they mark triumph over Nazi Germany in World War II, and we'll get a big ceremony in Moscow and in other cities, although some of them actually have been canceled for security reasons because of Ukraine's attacks behind the front lines. Today, a much more focused affair, which is going to be uh, Vladimir Putin getting another 6 years in charge of the country. This is after the managed elections, which took place in mid March. Um, so we've got no surprises that this is occurring, but the question is what's the symbolism, what's the presentation that's taking place against the backdrop of that invasion? Now, of course, what Putin wants to project is I'm in charge here, I'm in control, I've got this authority, there's no risk of any economic or political collapse. And I think to the extent that he has triumphed against anybody that wanted to, take over his authority. Think about the Wagner Group mercenaries going back to last year, or think about the speculation in the West that there could be others within the Russian system who would challenge him if the war went really badly. I think Putin is there, and he's not going anywhere. But the wider question is, oh, does this mean that Putin's Russia is triumphant? Is, of course, much more problematic. I mean, the starting point and what Putin's always fighting is he didn't succeed in conquering Ukraine. I mean, you go back to February 2022, you cut through all the propaganda, all the spin. Putin wanted to put in a puppet government in Kiev, probably under a guy named Viktor Medvedchuk, who now is in exile in Russia. He wanted to get rid of the Zelensky government, probably even try to capture and kill Ukraine's leaders, and he wanted to effectively occupy most of the country. Hasn't happened. Now you and I are talking in May 2024 about whether Russia can grab a little bit more territory in eastern Ukraine, especially in the Donetsk region. But we're talking about only a small amount of territory, and it's more can Russia get that territory and then go to quote negotiations, which are in effect, a capitulation by Ukraine to accept Russia annexing parts of eastern Ukraine and parts of the south. That window for Russia is very, very small because of, I think, the key decision by the U.S. to provide this $60 billion in aid, by the European Union significantly ramping up its own assistance, and indeed aid coming in from other countries. You know, the question is whether Ukraine will hold those front lines in the east, possibly losing a few villages, possibly using one key town called Chasiv Yar in Donetsk. But then beyond that, what happens to the war behind the front lines? Because Ukraine is, of course, hitting the Russians. They're hitting oil refineries. They're hitting other installations. They're hitting occupied Crimea and taking out about a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet. And those capabilities go up if they get long range missiles now from the US as well as from France and the UK. So I don't think we're talking about a decisive war here, either way or the other. Already, American officials are saying, look to 2025 for a Ukrainian counteroffensive. So Putin's got to keep playing up this idea we're winning, we're winning, we're winning. When at best, he's got that equivalent of Blackadder's 1-to-1 ratio, which is, oh, here's a square meter of territory on the desk. Look, what's that scale? 1-to-1. Russia is elements of an autocracy with elements of oligarchy. And autocracy succeeds as long as that oligarchy, those elite businessmen, the elite within the intelligence services, of course, the elite within the military, the political elite, as long as they still think you should be the autocrat. And there are elements, you can go well back in Russian history and Soviet history when the cracks have occurred and the autocrat has wobbled and sometimes fallen. Uh, in this case, I don't think we're talking about Putin wobbling. I think that moment, that crack, when some elements of the Russian military may have worked with the Wagner Group mercenaries to say we need an alternative, that's come and gone. I think Putin has been successful by using a combination of threats and incentives in reducing, in sort of consolidating that oligarchy behind him. And of course, he's cracked down on the opposition and eliminated, people like Alexei Navalny. But you never know if in another 6 months' time, if we have another Ukrainian counteroffensive similar to what we had in the autumn of 2022, if the cracks will reappear. And you also have to add in the element, this is a man who is, I think, 71 years old, who has, been at the top of Russia for a quarter of a century, but that can take its toll. Now, he prides himself on being physically fit. But one can't say it's a guarantee that he'll be able to keep in that type of health in the next few years. And there is a serious question that if Putin went, to talk about the widening of the cracks, if Putin did go or was limited in what he could do, who then steps up? Who then steps up to maintain the war effort in Ukraine? Who then tries to maintain consolidation in Russia? So again, there's been a lot of doomsay, which is Russia's going to capitulate within a few months, sanctions will take their effect, and so on. From the start of this, marathon, not a sprint. So on the one hand, recognize that Putin has failed. He has failed in his big adventure to make Ukraine part of Greater Russia, but then don't expect Putin and Russia to collapse because of that failure. The short-term future of Putin's Russia is you stay the course and you hope that people will stay the course. You continue to try to overheat the economy to overcome the sanctions. You continue to try to find the resources, of course, to jack up military production. One of the strange things that saves Russia right now is because you've got a serious labor shortage. Because a lot of people, of course, are at the front, dying in Ukraine. Others have fled the country. It's not like there's a shortage of jobs and work to be done, which is there. And you can still get, domestically made goods, even if foreign made goods are in shorter supply. So in the short term, Putin keeps saying Mother Russia may keep it going. How long that goes is the open question because, can you seriously just dangle another year of war in Ukraine with very little to show for it in front of the Russian people? Even if you have control of state media, even if you've got, the propaganda machine on a day-to-day basis. So Putin's get out of trouble clause is back in the US. As the Russians continue to try to break support of Ukraine, and as they are stepping up the disinformation and political warfare, they're hoping Donald Trump gets into power in the US. And that I think is the big wild card for all of us because we know that even if Trump backed off a few weeks ago, which was one reason why the 60 billion in aid finally went through Congress, he is so insecure, he's so narcissistic, he's so unstable that he very easily could resort to blackmail of Ukraine again and cozying up to Putin. And at that point, that I think does give Putin an edge in what has been the ultimate goal. If I can't defeat Ukraine in the battlefield, I can defeat them politically by breaking those who will support them. It's really interesting that the one soundbite that's come out of Putin's speech, because it was a relatively brief speech, is look, we're ready to work with the West as an equal. They have to respect us, and that, of course, is a standard line. And of course, it's a line which says Russia is a great power, et cetera. But I think there's a glimpse there in what the play could be, which is look, if Putin, let's say, and his military grab a little bit more of eastern Ukraine, because they control almost all of the Luhansk region. Let's say they control more of the Donetsk region. They, of course, have destroyed and occupied part of the southern part of Ukraine. Think of the port city of Mariupol, think of part of Zaporizhia region. If they then go back to September 2022, which is when Putin declared an annexation of those four regions, and he says, okay, we've annexed these four regions, we want you to recognize that. If they can break support of Ukraine, where Ukraine is forced to the negotiating table to accept that loss of territory, which will become part of Russia, then I think that may be Putin's play. He's not going to get Kyiv back. I don't think he's going to get Odessa back. I think it's a long shot that he gets Ukraine's second city, Kharkiv, even though they're pounding it on a daily basis. So I think the play is get about 20-25% of Ukraine, declare victory, declare a stronger Russia, and hope that the West will then accept that and lift the economic sanctions and lift the political isolation. There's not an exit plan through Dmitry Medvedev, the former president, the man who at one point would have been quote a centrist in Russian politics because Medvedev's off his head. I won't speculate further on whether there may be consumption of substances behind this. But the fact is that Medvedev spends most of his time issuing, dark threats, of nuclear conflict and of Russia taking over not only Ukraine but parts of Eastern Europe, and then just insulting people right, left, and center. And I don't think that's just show. I don't think he's actually a man who's dealing with a full deck at this point. Uh, you know, Putin handing over to the Russian military is problematic because Russia, being an autocracy, you don't return to military control. You don't give that a highlight. So the question is, who else is there in the political elite who he relies upon? And and the point here is that the main people that Putin relies upon are going to be that inner staff in the Kremlin, and those are largely not politicians, so to speak. Those are his fixers, and fixers aren't necessarily the people who step up. So no, I mean, there can be others who speculate on whether the mayor of Moscow could be a likely replacement if it happens, on whether there are others in the Politburo who could step up. But I think right now it's Putin or bust as far as Russia's immediate future is concerned.